Lights, camera, action. What's up, everybody? This is Star, and listen, if I waited another minute to do this video, it would not get done. I decided that today is the day that I want to talk about being an adult Black woman with ADHD, someone who has just recently been diagnosed with ADHD. So I'm going to talk very briefly about my personal story and just a very quick overview about what ADHD actually is. You may know about it, you may have heard about it, you may not understand all the intricacies of it and how it can affect an adult and why it's so important that I share my story, and that hopefully, if you are someone suffering with a misunderstanding of how different and beautiful your brain can work, then it's important for you to have this information, especially if you are a Black woman. I'm a Black woman. I want to speak to my Black people, but I also want to specifically speak to Black women. I have gotten a lot of great information that has been from, and for everybody. There are two people in particular who I feel are really, really good at talking about ADHD in adults. One is a Black PhD student, and another is a Caucasian white girl. Her channel is very excellent, engaging, has great graphics, and she's got a whole team around her. A wonderful partner, I believe, who supports her and understands her. She's got experts and people in that space talking about it. But the thing is that it doesn't address some of the systemic issues that face, I can talk about at least Black women in America, because me being a person who has to work here, live here, exist here as a human being, there are just going to be things that come up that can't be addressed by someone who doesn't have that experience. So I think it's important that we do have Black women talking about what it's like to live with ADHD. There were a couple of other channels, and I will write this down. So go check out the first woman who I was talking about. She has a TED Talk called Failing at Normal, and this other young, beautiful Black man has a TED Talk called ADHD Sucks. Well, not really. And these two videos, I cried at the first one because it was so fitting who I am. Before this diagnosis, I would not have known to even ever look up anything about ADHD. It was the farthest thought from my mind that I could have ADHD because I did not know what it was. And this is coming from someone who was a former special ed teacher, but of course, I went through the Teaching Fellows program, which does not adequately prepare you to be a teacher. Just look it up pretty much anywhere. Look it up on Reddit. That is another situation. I do and will address some of the issues with growing up with someone with undiagnosed ADHD in the school system and how that affected my experience. But to get back on track, because I often talk myself right out of the topic that I was talking about, I will list in the description other Black women with ADHD on YouTube that I've seen, because I believe in supporting. Listen, I know from watching videos that have 200 views and, maybe one like, that it doesn't, for me, I can't do this for the numbers. It doesn't mean I won't try to learn and understand what it takes to have a successful YouTube channel. But what I will say is that is not my primary goal. I just got done watching a video on the white girl's channel who I was talking about. She had a wonderful guest of a man who got diagnosed in his 40s and is now an ADHD coach. He was talking about how he tells his clients that sometimes you have to find your path by walking it, and that passion has often led him in the right direction. So this is what I'm doing now. I really felt like it couldn't wait. And I've been thinking about doing this for a really long time, but I kept thinking of reasons why I'm not ready. I'm not ready to tell my story. I don't know that much about ADHD. What are people going to think of me? What about my background? What about this grainy, low resolution video? What about all the reasons why I shouldn't? So as soon as I downloaded, because I had Windows 7 and now I have Windows 10, as soon as I downloaded that, I'm like, look, I got my internal mic fixed. I got my, webcam fixed. Let's do this, because there's someone, even one person out here who needs to know that there's someone else out there who is dealing with this. It's very challenging. It's very challenging. So I'm going to take a sip of wine. I did do sober September, but it's October, so I should probably be going live on Facebook with this. But so I want to talk about my life leading up to knowing or learning that I have a very special condition that people say should not, especially the people who have it, say definitely should not be considered a disorder. I like to think that my brain is ideal for happy dreamers. My new acronym for ADHD is always dreaming happy dreams, because I don't want to carry the vibration of the D in ADHD, the last one, as a disorder. And also, we don't have an attention deficit. We have an ability to hyper focus on what actually interests us and give it a magnanimous amount of attention. Okay. So, of course, I believe the mental health industry has created a kind of stigma, and of course, society not really wanting to even address mental health and mental differences and challenges, and not wanting to address the society that has been created that makes it really difficult for people who want to do what they like to make money. You know what I mean? Like, that has, all of those things have created a kind of stigma around this, because we don't want to address the fact that people are different, because we want everybody to fit into a little box to serve the corporations, right? So I go off on tangents. Excuse me for that. But my personal story. So I got diagnosed with ADHD in the month of August. In fact, let me find out and remember exactly when that was, because I don't remember many dates, but I remember this one. So August 12th, because I remember I actually went out on a date a week before, and that person was telling me that they had ADHD and that they never wanted to go on medication because they did not believe that they wanted to go on medication. They were diagnosed when they were in school, and they didn't have a great time in school, but they were very successful at different things. And this person was an artist. This person was involved in athletics. And this person had many different ways to get a lot of that hyperactivity, like that hyperactive energy out. And they had ways to stimulate their mind. They had creative outlets, which is very important for people like us, happy dreamers. We need those kind of outlets, because the lack of dopamine, and they say that people who have ADHD have less dopamine receptors. We need to flood our brain with basically good feelings, or it's kind of like a depression kind of sets in. And I notice I can get like that. I get cabin fever because while I really like to be home and like really into this laptop thing, I'm a writer. So I'm like, and I'm a researcher. Oh my gosh. Talk about the rabbit holes of Google and search engines. I'm always searching things. I can get cabin fever. I can get into a lethargic kind of mood, and then begin to self-isolate because I'm not stimulated enough. I begin to feel negative, and then I don't want to deal with anybody else, when really, especially me being an extrovert, I need conversations that are interesting in order for me to have those good feelings and get energy. So it's kind of like, You just have to be aware of your cycles. So on this day, the 7 days later, I was diagnosed. 7 days later, after this day, I had when he told me that, the doctors told him that he had ADHD, I was like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Never in a million years ever thought that that would be applied to me. So let me tell you about my therapist. She is someone who I trust, but her being a Christian therapist and me having gone through a whole journey with Christianity, having been raised Pentecostal, and now, having gone into the New Age movement. And I was even reading tarot cards at one point. It was like great money, but I had a very negative experience with some demonic influences and stuff that I did not feel were healthy for me. So I felt like I was attacked and I ceased all divination practices. But I still feel the desire to heal people, to connect with people. And I still find that my intuition is like this and very active. And I'm still an empathic person, which is probably another reason why I want to protect myself a lot of times. Because when I'm open, I'm like out there like this. And I'm also taking in all of that energy as well. So therefore, when I'm talking to people, it's like if they don't have kind of a similar vibe or good intentions, or when I see people fighting or things like that, it just gets really negative for me. And I also feel like I'm weighed down by that. So I feel like I have to protect myself. I'm like really invested in every single personal interaction that I have, put it like that. People can feel it. So I've had people tell me lots of different deep things, life stories and everything like that, because I'm super interested in who they are. So, I say that to say, my therapist is someone who, because of her Christian influences, it's not like I can't trust her 100%, but it is that I have to understand that she is going to come to it from a certain point of view in a certain way. Like, she's going to look at things from a Christian point of view. So even some of the choices that I may feel, even as I identified as a Christian, I didn't feel were sins or wrong. Her coming from that background, she, disclosed that she was a Christian, had that Christian background. And there is a credential for a Christian counselor, I believe. There's an official way that you can go about. It's not unprofessional to have that be there, but she says she's able to separate it, but I don't really find that to be absolutely true. I didn't see evidence of her completely separating. I did feel moments of judgment in some of the things that I would express. So I'm just trying to give you a background of me and this therapist relationship. I didn't see her regularly. I also went to New York for 6 months. And so that was a period of time that I did not see her. And when I returned, I didn't really have the money or the copay because my insurance actually restarted. So I had to go under a new plan. And then there was a $30 copay. And me being the person that I actually was not employed at the time. I'm still not employed. I have a business that I started where I write content. And I do ghostwriting and I do research for clients. And there's been challenges with that. We will discuss that later. But I didn't have the money to continue to go in and see her all the time. So even though I had her as a therapist for 2 years, it was more intense and more regular meetings in the beginning of our time seeing each other, which I believe was, let's say, 6 months before I went to New York. So I went to New York in March of 2018, and I returned back to South Carolina, which is where I currently am, in November of 2018. So between November of 2018 and January is when I basically started my business. And then in February is when I threw my first event. And then I incorporated my company, which is Lemon Seed. And then I decided to niche down because it was starting as a virtual assistant and event planning company. And I decided to do away with the virtual assistants because, again, there's something having to do with me having to be interested in what I do. So I figured that people would probably throw a bunch of mundane tasks at me that I didn't want to do. And I'm really interested in writing. I love writing. I love the flow and the creative process of writing. So I was like, let me just go ahead and focus on that. And so I went through the process of niching down my business from February, let's say about March or so, to where we're at now. So I would say over the summer, let's say July, is where I was very clear on the fact that I was going to be doing content writing. And here we are in August, where I mean, I'm have fallen off the wagon of doing all the routine tasks that I have to do to get clients, because ADHD really does make that challenging to do the same mundane tasks day in and day out. But I'm still looking for those big opportunities, still doing tons of input and learning, right? Tons of that. And trying to work out all of these productivity things that I need to do, because I know that I have an issue with time management, prioritization, and organization. At this point, I think it would be helpful pause the video and just go look up what ADHD is. I know I probably should have addressed that earlier in the video, but now I'm explaining it as if you should already have an understanding of what ADHD is and some of the challenges that happen. So I'll say on the day that she diagnosed me, she actually took me out to lunch because I actually got a job offer as an editor for a small paper in New York that I used to freelance write for. And I was supposed to be leaving in, let's say, October, basically this month, of 2019. And that ended up not happening. I was very skeptical about moving back to New York and having to experience another winter there. I lived in New York for 13 years, tried to live up there again as a teacher, decided that it wasn't for me with much pain. I felt extremely guilty for I felt like I was abandoning kids, but I knew that under the current system, I knew that under the education system of not having the same goals as like a teacher like me, like actually wanting to teach the kids how to think for themselves, under the education system, you would have to basically teach to the test, and that those goals didn't align for me. So, when you're dealing with that many people, you're dealing with that much energy, and you're dealing with being unprepared, as I was as a teaching fellow, then you have to decide, having the additional challenge, which I did not know I had at that time, of ADHD, how much of a nightmare that would have been with the lack of support that I got from my school. Meaning, I didn't have any curriculum. They kept letting go of my co-teachers, and I was not a specialist in English. I was a sped teacher in English. So all I was supposed to do was modify lesson plans and not write them from scratch. And I wasn't given any. So that was a nightmare. I'm over it now, but I think it's important to just kind of address that, because listen, you can get really down on yourself with having a different brain in a world that's set up for people to basically be machines. So August 12th is like the golden day, right? I meet up with her for lunch. She's very generous. She takes me out. She knows I don't have any money. So she decides it's going to be my going away gift for her to just take me out. And we have a conversation. She's telling me that she's kind of going through her menopause, and how menopause can actually mimic ADD or have some of those traits. Basically, those conditions can be associated. Not the hyperactivity part, but the attention deficit part, which means her attention span is short and she's reaching for different things to do, and she's multitasking like never before. She was telling me this, I believe, as a segue to kind of introduce this devastating information that I have all the traits of ADHD and some of the traits of mania, bipolar. And so what she explained to me was that mania has some of the same overlapping symptoms as ADHD. Let me go ahead and tell you what those are now. Adult ADHD can give you difficulty with following directions. I'm great with Google Maps as long as I don't hear that. As long as I don't hear her talking, I'm good with just looking down and like following a map. But if someone tells me directions, it's like, okay, in one ear, not the other. And I'm just like, right. Let me go ask somebody else so I can actually write it down. Remembering information. I'll tell you a little bit of story about that. Concentrating, organizing tasks, and finishing work on time. Now, I'm actually great with deadlines, and there's a really good reason for that. But when it comes to being places on time, punctuality, like getting my physical body somewhere on time, And I always beat myself up for that. For years, I beat myself up for that. Um, Challenges of having ADHD: anxiety, chronic boredom, chronic lateness and forgetfulness, like we said, depression, trouble concentrating when reading. Now, I used to read all the time as a child, but I would have we didn't have all these electronic devices. Trouble controlling anger. There were many, many times in my life when I had rage and I didn't realize it because they all happened at very spaced out points, but they were clearly situations that where I could have been arrested, and I don't know why nobody ever did, but definitely had issues with anger and rage. And it's I got to be completely real because it's what is the point in hiding anymore? Problems at work. I've had a million jobs, and most of the time it was I want to do something bigger. I want to do something more. And really, I was hired to be a cog in a wheel and perform this function over and over and over again, the way that someone told me to do it. When I'm seeing holes in it, I'm seeing flaws in it, I see ways to improve it. I'm tired of doing this role. I want to do something else. I want to interact with more people. I need change. I need something new that's challenging. And most jobs that I was qualified for at the time just could not provide that kind of simulation and variety for me. They could not provide that kind of challenge for me. So, that's why I had those problems at work. Impulsiveness, low tolerance for frustration, low self-esteem, mood swings, poor organization skills, procrastination, relationship problems, substance abuse or addiction, and low motivation. Now, this is by no means a questionnaire to decide if you have ADHD. What you can do is there's a number of things that you can do. Watch a lot of videos by people who have been in the space for a while and who have, laid out some kind of research, because it may be easier for you to listen rather than just read an article, or you can read an article. And if you have any type of, employee assistance program at your job, you can go see a counselor that way. You can try to seek out a therapist who might give you a first free session and say you want an assessment for ADHD. But I believe it's hard. Again, the reason why I think my therapist took 2 years to finally tell me that I had it is because she wanted to make sure, by observing me over and over again and having me talk and explain the kind of things that I was going through and explain my thought process, that's how she wanted to make sure that she was giving me the right diagnosis. I don't know if there's a questionnaire that you can just take, but I think that you can try to start to build a relationship with the therapist, because I want to approach this from the idea that I know that the Black community is still, we're dipping our toes into what it means to engage with mental health professionals in a way that is not scary and in a way that we can actually trust somebody. So again, I want to approach it from, I'm a Black woman in America, and this is very key. And also, I'm a Black woman of African descent and of Indigenous American descent. So I don't know if y'all know, but the first Indians were Black, and I believe that those are my ancestors. So I have, you act like you can't be both. I mean, that's just a whole nother kind of niche discussion in the Black community. But it's okay, yes, not denying Blackness or Africanness when you say that your ancestors are indigenous to this land. What I'm basically saying is that we have the rights to this land. Again, other conversation. Be prepared for a lot of that if you want to follow this channel. If you don't want to, you can turn it off now. It's cool. But wanted to address those things. So my therapist basically took her time to diagnose me, but when she did, she kind of did it haphazardly. I mean, she drove me to my car because she had to leave, and then as we're getting up from the table, and I'm putting down the tip because I wanted to contribute something. So she's like, "Oh yeah, well, you have all the traits of ADHD," and I'm just like, "Okay, what?" What does that mean even? And as she began to explain, it was a lot of those things on the list, and it was a very devastating moment for me. I'm the kind of person where when things happen that are a shock, I'm actually able to remain extremely calm. There's something about having this different type of brain that we have. It makes us great in emergencies. And I've been faced with several emergencies. In fact, I was a flight attendant, and that's what we were trained in emergencies, life and death situations. And it's because our brain has 2 time zones, now and not now. And so when you're in an emergency, the time is now, and you don't have any other decisions to make. You just know that you have to act because it's a life and death situation, or else the effects could be devastating. So again, these are like very interesting things that I'm still learning about myself, and it's the journey, you know. So I'm really grateful. But I think that where was I? It was devastating to me. So even though I was able to remain really calm when she first told me, I was very sad on the way home. I began to feel really bad about myself because I didn't know what this meant for me. I didn't know what the next step was going to be, because in my life, I kind of never feel settled, or I have not feel settled really ever. You know, the most settled I felt was when I was with my partner, who I lived with in Charlotte, and we were together for 2 years. Even though that relationship was very rocky and had its issues, I felt like I was going to be with him and marry him. We did eventually get engaged, but I still knew I didn't want to even live in Charlotte. Like when I was in New York, I wanted to move to California in 5 or 6 years and ended up staying for 13 years. Um, when I was a teacher, I knew I couldn't remain a teacher, even if I finished out the year and got my certification, or however long it would take. I would go do something else with that certification. So to me, it really was like, oh, wow, what am I? Who am I? And when am I ever going to feel like I've settled into something and this is just who I am? When can I get comfortable? You know, I've been comfortable in sweatpants, I've been comfortable in bed, but I feel like I've never been comfortable like in my life. Um, Life choices, you know, in my career, you know. Now, writing is something I've decided that I'm going to do for the rest of my life. That's something I know I'll always do. I'll probably always be a performer. There'll always be some projects. You know, I perform at spoken word events. I perform my short stories. I perform songs and music, and I always am writing. It's a way for me to get all these racing thoughts out of my head and all these ideas. I want to tell the stories that resonate with people. And also, I come from a journalism background as well, self taught. I never went to J school, but you know, I like to tell people stories because I think, again, I'm very interested in people and I think they're interesting when I'm approaching them from the view of, wow, you're an interesting case study. You're an interesting topic. What made you do that? What are your views on love? What are your views on war? You know, just really getting into people's bigger ideas. I love that kind of stuff. Meanwhile, I'm also really good at focusing on details. Excuse me. So, um, that was the beginning of a mourning process for me, but it was also the beginning of a wonderful new journey. And if I get emotional, it's because this shit is real, y'all. Like, um, up until this point, this is very key, and I want to share this with you. Up until this point, between the last time I had visited my therapist before I went to New York, which had already been about 6 months, you know, I had just finished my degree. Um, I gotta get into the story of that later. I cannot even digress and get into that story right now. Let's just say I started my degree, I took 10 years off, and then I finished my degree online, SUNY Empire State College. It was one of the best decisions I ever made. I really felt like I was able to grow and flourish as a writer, as an intellectual, as a researcher, and as an artist, surprisingly. So I loved, because I chose my own classes. Interdisciplinary degree, chose my own classes, did not have anyone telling me this is what you will study. That doesn't work for me. So I went ahead and started looking up all kinds of things about ADHD, and it was really eye opening because so much of that resonated with me, and I began to reflect on a lot of things that happened to me in school and the ways that I was really smart on paper, but I couldn't behaviorally get it together, so to speak. I was not able to sit down and just, when I heard something that was wrong or when I saw someone being treated poorly, I couldn't stop my impulsivity of speaking out against it. And that caused me a lot of problems. It even affected my relationship with my dad because he was just like, I guess, trying to be some kind of disciplinarian, didn't understand me. And I felt like we were constantly butting heads because I am basically just like my dad. He's like really, except for the fact that he respects authority and can like follow orders. I don't necessarily respect just because you're in a position doesn't mean I can't question you. So in my household, I'm able to question authority. When I get out in school, they're like, no, you must sit down and just be a part of the crowd and conform. Very much did not work for me, but yet I could ace every test. The thing is, I just stopped caring. So I almost failed. I did fail one class and I almost didn't graduate. I got suspended a lot. And all my problems pretty much started in fifth grade when I started speaking up and out, and we stopped moving and dancing as a part of we stopped, we had recess, but I was taken out of those gifted and talented classes because I had already grade in school as well. And I just was with I don't want to say regular kids, but I'll just say that if the gifted and talented kids and the gifted and talented curriculum was way more suited to the way my brain worked. But sitting in a class and just doing what everybody else was doing, and I was not stimulated, that caused me to act out and that caused me to speak out. And that's a part of the impulsivity. I could not control it, So no one knew that I had ADHD at the time. I didn't find out until I was 34, which was basically, again, 2 months ago. So I suffered because I was constantly getting in trouble. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And I was like, how come my friends, who I feel like I'm so much like, can sit through school all day and not get in trouble? And I keep getting in trouble. Like, why can't I stop doing this? How come I get isolated from the rest of the group? And it really affected me. And I think that's where some of the depression and anxiety and rage and anger comes from, that they say can be associated with this brain difference, because it's just the world is not set up for it. I never had those problems when I was in the free flowing classes with like kids like me, and I could just like explore what I want and whatever. And I was still learning, like I was just learning something new and really intense and interesting and cool every single time. I wasn't being fed the regular curriculum. So that's something I already knew that, but I didn't know it had anything to do with ADHD. That's something that I definitely would keep in mind if I ever had kids or if I was ever in charge of any child's education. I would definitely understand the different needs that they had and realize that a self-directed education is definitely the way to go, in my opinion. So whew, where did I get off track here? It started a whole new process for me. After I think what I was trying to get back to was that right before I left for New York, I saw my therapist like one last time, and I was already kind of wondering about my life. And, I'm 34, and after having gone through a string of jobs in New York for those 13 years, and I had a fibroid. I had to come back home because the fibroid grew to a point where I was having extremely painful and bloody periods. I was like not able to work on those days. I had to keep calling out. I wasn't able to. I was in massage therapy school at the time. I was not able to finish my curriculum there. And I basically moved back home to South Carolina where I could live rent free with my parents, have my surgery, and get back into the work field and get on my own again, or so I thought. That's what I thought. What ended up happening was very different because I kept going through the same cycles, even though it took me about a year to kind of heal after the surgery. But I got another job and again, felt very overwhelmed. I felt like I got a job at a shelter as an administrative coordinator, and, working at a nonprofit with very high demands, you are going to be doing several different jobs. Not only did I feel I wasn't being paid enough, $31,000 for what I was being asked to do was definitely not enough. But at the same time, I was not able to feel okay knowing that there was so much that needed to be done, that I was falling on me, that I wasn't able to do it. And I was extremely stressed every day. And I felt like I was being left there to fend for myself. There were so many things that would just come. I didn't feel I had the proper training, so it was just one of those situations. So from September to about was it April to September? I don't remember. Yeah. Okay. So from about April to September, right after I moved from New York, right, I had that job at the shelter. So I began to notice a pattern in myself that, wow, it seems like I'm quitting every job after 6 months. I'm just getting to a breaking point, and it doesn't seem like I'm able to just the way other people seem to be able to just, oh, just brush it off, just go in there and do what you have to do and just come home. I wasn't able to do that. I was getting attached to the kids. I was very concerned about their situation, them being homeless. They were there because they were homeless, abused, neglected, or abandoned. So I was already like empathic, dealing with the fact that I'm there with these kids, wanting to build more of a relationship with them, being told that wasn't my job, being told that so many other things that weren't supposed to be my job were now my job. The stress was absolutely overwhelming. And I felt completely devastated daily by stress. I was smoking American spirits daily. I was doing those coping mechanisms and self medicating from feeling so stressed out. Um, so I began to examine myself. And after seeing her for those 2 years, about 1.5 years in, I began to really want to understand about myself like, because I got another job after that. I worked at Intuit TurboTax during the tax season. This was after coming back home from being a teacher, because I already explained to you what that experience was like. And you could say, I was just choosing bad jobs, right? But the thing is, even though that they were bad, why were other people able to stay on them and I wasn't? Other teachers experienced the exact same feelings that I felt, but they were able to stay. They didn't have great preparation and they went through the same program I did. Why were they able to stay and I wasn't? And I just didn't understand it. I didn't understand how people were able to keep jobs for a long time. The only jobs I was able to keep for a long time was a flight attendant. I was able to do that for 2 years and I quit on my own because I was just so tired of the conditions on the planes. They were constantly breaking down. The health, my health suffered being a flight attendant. I did like traveling, but I decided I wanted to travel on my own terms. I didn't want to be a flight attendant anymore. So, it's just like one of those things. I began to examine myself and I wanted to understand why I couldn't do the things that other people could do, it seemed. I'm like, I know I'm smart. I'm smarter than everybody. You know what I'm saying? And I felt like really smart and I still do. I know I'm extremely intelligent. I'm able to synthesize information, make connections between things that other people don't see. I'm extremely empathic. I'm a great people person. I know how to listen to others and make them feel heard. Why isn't any of these core skills, these soft skills, being like translating over to job longevity for me and therefore sustain economic stability for me? Why am I back home? And I know a lot of millennials have to go through this. Again, there are other issues involved. There's literally job disparities between African Americans. There's pay disparities between African Americans and other groups, African American women and other groups. So all of those factor in. There's the student loan bubble debt crisis, and a lot of millennials are moving back home. All of that is factoring in. But when I found something that I thought was promising for me, why couldn't I stay? Of course, then there's the teacher crisis, education crisis. A lot of people are leaving teaching, but maybe they stayed longer than 6 months. A lot of other teachers at my school that I worked at left as well. So it's like, it could just all be God just showing me, listen, none of that was for you. I understand that. Still wanted to understand myself though. Why was I going through this? So even though the diagnosis was devastating, it was kind of like a light bulb as well. It was kind of like, this is actually starting to make sense. And I was already, I came back home and I was like, I guess I'll start a business. I bought this virtual assistant course, decided to niche down into writing, which is exactly what I was doing before. It's like, well, if I would have just stayed with writing when I started it back in New York, then who knows where I would have been right now, because that's something that I can actually do. The deadlines are like great for me. They create the kind of pressure and stimulation that makes me be able to focus and be really interested in something and finish on time. So, awesome. But it's like, I just I just came back home to me understanding that writing was one of the things that I was going to be doing. Um, Event planning as well, but that comes with its challenges because it literally takes so much energy out of me. Like I just feel like, I planned 2 events and I'm still recovering from the last one. It takes a lot of energy. So anyway, let's get back on track. I'm gonna have to do better with my list next time. Um, ADHD was kind of the key. And I felt sad about it. I felt negative about it. I'm still learning about it. Every time I learn something about it, it makes another light bulb go off and say, oh, well, if someone else with ADHD can go out there and be successful and happy and fulfilled, then I know that I can. It's just a journey for me. Um, then I know that I can if they're able to do it. And it gives me hope. And I know that there's not a lot of Black women talking about they have ADHD, but I think it's just really important that I tell this story and let's see what happens from here on out, because I can definitely say I was going to ask her, listen, what am I missing? Is there something I'm missing? Because I don't want to live in my parents' house until I'm 43. I need to make money sustainably. What can I do? You know, like how can I do this? And before I ever got a chance to ask her that question, she gave me the answer. One other thing about the memory. I have, they say one of the two most important things that you need to know or that people with ADHD need to do is find the right partner and find the right career. I can definitely say I have a partner of sorts. We don't have a label on our relationship, except that it is loving and trusting and nurturing and covering and building and growing and beautiful and sustainable. He has been super patient with me. And he, we noticed that every time he would tell me something, a lot of times it would be like, I would forget. But it would really be like, I never used to say I had a bad memory. I didn't remember having a bad memory. But it would be like every time he would be like, remember I told you this? Remember I told you that? And I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And it would literally be like that so often, at least 2 to 3 times a week. And I feel like it started getting more intense. And at some point he was like, very lovingly, he was like, do you think that you should get that checked out? Because, you kind of forget things a lot. And I'm just like, and I mean, it was also going along with the fact that I would get days mixed up. I would never seem to remember. He has a monthly event. I would never seem to remember when the event was. I just kind of knew when it was coming up and would just go, but I didn't really have a sense of, oftentimes, especially being a flight attendant, I would forget what day it was. And then I realized, okay, I'm not even a flight attendant now. Still forget what day it is, and I would just forget things. I would forget what he would tell me. And I can see how it was wearing on him and it was getting to be very frustrating. And it's one thing when someone says something to you. My mom does this all the time. She'll be very vague and be like, so you didn't like the thing? And I'll be like, what thing? Like, can you, like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But he would actually like give context and it'd be like, so remember I told you about the A, B, C, and D last Wednesday? I'd be like, what? So that was kind of I really was almost offended. It's easy to, when you're a girl, it's easy to be offended by a guy and just like find a reason to get mad at him and just like hold that against him and make him like try to, that's actually not a great thing. It's called a testing behavior. And that's actually like in the whole attachment theory, but we're not going to talk about that right now. It's not a good thing, but if I wanted to get away with it, I could have, and I don't choose to do that because I think that that's really not okay. It's not respectful. And I don't want to do that to him because it doesn't make any sense. It's like not okay to do. But yeah, in the past I've definitely been guilty of that. Like I'm just pretending to be mad at something, or like even when the person is going out of their way to be super respectful, you're like still choosing to get offended. It's like, okay, you got to take some responsibility for when you're offended as well. Like I believe in internal locus of control. Oh, anyway, I chose not to be offended. I chose to really take him seriously because I knew that every time I would tell him that I didn't remember something, it was kind of getting on his nerves. So I was like, this is a good person. This is a person who adds value to my life. This is a person who seeks to understand me and is willing to kind of go on this wild roller coaster ride. And it has been for like since we met like 3 years ago. So like might not be a good thing to just totally disregard what this person is saying. We talk often enough. So I mean, I think that I should take it into consideration. And so I did. And that coupled with an internal desire within me to understand myself, understand my patterns, and knowing that being wise enough to understand that I could be missing something very key and glaring to other people, but not to myself because I am myself. Those two things made me really want to ask my therapist that question. And when she gave me that answer, I knew, okay, universe, I know you working this out. God is working this all out. So trust and believe it's going to be okay. But sometimes we need reminders. And that's why we have YouTube. That's why God gave us YouTube so that we can just like tell each other that everything's going to be okay. And if you're a Black woman with ADHD, everything is going to be okay. You can still be fabulous. You can still succeed. Even if you're a millennial living at your parents' house, you can still succeed and you can still be fabulous and you can still learn the art of minimalism, which is what I'm doing. Learn the art of, and I had already started a process of this as well, honoring your internal rhythms, honoring your natural rhythms, which means you're not going to be able to do the same thing every day at the same time. I already knew that about myself. I didn't know it had anything to do with ADHD, but I knew that about myself. So it's just like, it's kind of crazy how these things come full circle. How do I cope? Productivity wise, I do use something called the Pomodoro technique. And there's a tool called Toggle that you can download right into Chrome and go ahead and use that because it has a Pomodoro timer built in. So when I know what I have, that's when I can finally decide to sit down and do the work, right? When I do that, I can use Toggle and I can go in and I can just, use their Pomodoro timer. It will set for 25 minutes and then it will give me a notification and say, stop working. And then I can give my brain a break. But I shut out everything during that time. And I normally get a lot done. I get really proud of myself. I haven't been using it lately. That's the problem. Consistency. I can do some things consistent. I put on clothes consistently. I do my makeup consistently. I brush my teeth consistently. I bathe consistently. I eat consistently. I don't ever want you to fall into the trap of saying that it's so difficult for you to be inconsistent. Give yourself credit for the things that you are doing consistently. I am consistent in certain ways, but in other ways, I'm not consistent. So I can learn to work on those and I can learn to support myself with things that are going to help me work on those things. Another thing is having the right people around me. Like I have people around me who understand or who are just really supportive. I don't think my parents really get it, but they're supportive nonetheless. They've always been supportive of me, my sister, who was a sped teacher, no, she's not a sped teacher, but basically, I mean, she's a culinary arts teacher and most of her kids are special ed. So she understands some of the challenges that come with that, and so in speaking to her, I think she's like a little bit more understanding than maybe the average person. One of my biggest supporters who also, she says, I have a little bit of ADHD. She says that about herself, but she's been diagnosed with a couple of other issues. She weaned herself off anti-anxiety meds. I'm so proud of her. Is my friend Julia, who's basically our sister. Like we're all really good friends. And she actually, is very understanding. Now she said, I don't think you have ADHD. I think you have this and that. But I was like, well, I do have ADHD. Maybe that's not the best word. Like we already discussed, that someone saying that it's a disorder is probably a misnomer and not correct. But embracing it as a difference, yes. So even though I felt like I had been labeled and I didn't know what to do with the stigma that was around this. I also knew that every single thing I had read, everything I had read, and everything I saw on YouTube about it up until that point resonated with me so deeply that I would often be moved to tears in just how understood and seen I felt by watching and hearing those things. So that's how I'm supportive. I already told you I have someone in my life who's super supportive just in everything. He always tells me, I know you'll never settle for anything less than the best for yourself. And the best thing for me is going to be different than for someone else. So basically, I think what he's affirming in me is that I'm going to continue to go on this journey and feel it out as I go. I hope you do the same. I know that was a mouthful. Oh my gosh. Listen, we're going to be okay. All right. ADHD. I don't want the vibration of a word that says disorder. I don't want the vibration of a word that says I have a deficit. But when I say ADHD, you can kind of understand what I'm saying and we can understand some of the challenges that come. And I choose to believe that it means always dreaming happy dreams. So goodbye, happy dreamers. This is Star. And let's continue to learn. Let's continue to support each other and grow as a community of Black women with ADHD, as a community of Black people with ADHD, and just as anyone. Just know I'm going to be speaking to my sisters, but you're welcome to be here, no matter who you are, because you're awesome. So, peace.